Joining me now, Pennsylvania Congresswoman Madeleine Dean. She's a former House impeachment manager and a member of the House Judiciary and Financial Services Committees. Congresswoman, welcome back to the show. Thanks for joining us. You've called for Postmaster General DeJoy's harmful policies to be reversed. Why is he still the Postmaster General?
Sadly, I don't understand why, except it is within the control of the Board of Governors. Mr. DeJoy should have been removed. And here's why. And I would distinguish among these three appointees that you're talking about. Mr. DeJoy, a big donor for Donald Trump, was appointed in June of 2020 as we were in the midst of a pandemic, where we were in the midst of an economic closure and running up to a presidential election. What did he do? He came in and he unplugged speed sorting systems to slow down mail. He put in place some delivery systems that slowed down mail and made it less effective, so that seniors in my area were saying, I'm not even getting mail every day. But the third thing he did, and we just had an oversight hearing in Philadelphia on this, you might have seen that mail theft is up dramatically. In last year, up 160%, 300,000 complaints of mail theft from people receiving their mail. Guess what DeJoy did? He made sure he stripped the post service inspectors so that their policing, their investigation would be really stripped of all of its power and ability. So mail theft goes on unabated and really took away the credibility of the Postal Inspection Service. So we met with some folks who were a part of that, that denuding of that important part of the agency. And DeJoy doesn't care about any of that.
So, Congresswoman, you mentioned the board, and you're right, the board has the power to remove DeJoy, not the president directly. But Senator Tammy Duckworth, your colleague in the Senate, has said that damaging policy decisions by the USPS Board of Governors are cause enough to fire them, which would allow Biden to appoint people who then fire DeJoy. What is your response to that possible plan of action?
I don't. That's the first I've read that, so I don't know. What I do know is that the President Biden had to refill some seats on the board of directors. It's going to take a long time to undo the extraordinary damage of the previous administration and the previous president. But I would call upon the current sitting board of governors to reconsider and to remove DeJoy.
So let's talk about another Trump appointee still in post, David Malpass, president of the World Bank. Here's what former vice president and climate change activist Al Gore had to say about him. Have a listen.
We need to get a new head of the World Bank, for God's sake. This is ridiculous to have a climate denier as the head of the World Bank.
It is ridiculous to have a climate change denier. He's right in charge of the World Bank. Do you think the administration should be taking steps, perhaps behind the scenes with international allies, to remove and replace another Trump appointee, World Bank President David Malpass?
And you know, and I think you just in the setup talked about the New York Times interview where he 3 times was pressed to acknowledge man's hand in climate change and the burning of fossil fuels and the warming of our planet, leading to these extraordinary storms. He couldn't do it. And then he had to backpedal and come back with a statement to acknowledge climate change. He has disqualified himself. It's very clear. Because remember what the mission of the World Bank is. It's to make lending available to the poorest nations who are disproportionately impacted by these storms and famine and drought. He's disqualified himself. He should be removed.
And let's talk about one last Trump appointee that I've been talking about, who Biden reappointed, Fed Chair Jerome Powell. You grilled him on planned rate hikes back in March in committee. Let's have a listen.
I know you have a series of meetings and possible rate hikes. You talked about in 2 weeks, likely the 25 basis points increase. For my constituents, my consumers, what impact will we begin to see, will they begin to see with the small incremental rate hikes?
What you feel is these are fairly small rate increases, 1/4 percentage point every 7 weeks. And we haven't, by the way, we haven't made any decisions after this meeting. But the thought is that rates move up, our policy rate moves up, and with it, rates on mortgages, rates on car loans. People start to spend a little bit less, and the economy demand goes, returns to a lower level.
Congresswoman, what do you think will be the actual consequences, nationwide, economy-wide consequences of the Fed's rate hikes, which have continued since that exchange of yours and which we clearly haven't seen the end of?
Well, I remember that hearing very, very well. And in preparation for it, we talked about that word transitory, that the Fed chairman was using the word transitory. It was a regrettable word then because it was fuzzy and unclear. It meant temporary. And of course, it was predicted poorly. Inflation has not been temporary, and it is hurting people in my congressional district. And of course, we went from 25 basis points increases, which would be a small increase, to up to 75 basis points. Take a look at where interest rates are now. Go try to get a mortgage. More than a year ago, you would have been in the 3% range. Now you're over 6%. That has real world consequences on folks in my district, whether it's their credit card debt, it's a car loan, it's a mortgage, please God, a mortgage. It has real pain. So sadly, I think the Fed did not see that inflation was going to be more prolonged. I am pleased to see gas prices, for example, coming down, but my constituents are really feeling it. And I know the Fed has a duty really to titrate, to adjust, but this is a pretty painful way to have gone about it.
Yeah, but there's always a concern that they're going to put the prices above jobs, and jobs are pretty important in this country. Do you get the frustration, Congresswoman, of a lot of people in your party grassroots who see the Democrats bringing a knife to a gunfight while Republicans seem to always bring a rocket launcher? You have Trump and his acolytes openly promising to purge the entire federal government bureaucracy if they get back into power in 2024. And then you have a Democratic administration right now unable or unwilling to remove Trump appointees from crucial positions where they're doing harm to our economy, our democracy, our climate, as well as harm to your own party's re-election prospects.
I certainly understand that argument and the passion that you bring to it. But I don't want to see an administration do the very same things that the previous corrupt administration did, like this Schedule F nonsense that Trump is talking about. You know, my son worked in the Obama White House, and I remember he was giving an orientation to the incoming Trump folks. They had no idea who would stay or who would go. They have no idea of governance. They have no idea of who should be legacy and not a political appointee, and who should not. They literally came in and said, oh, you're all staying, right? Had no idea what they were doing. And of course, governed in that same way and deciding to slash and put in political hacks like Mr. DeJoy. So I want to see an administration that believes in good governance, but takes strong opinions as to those who are not doing their job. Somebody who's a climate denier, and he says he's not. But clearly, he, at this moment, in September of 2022, he could not, in a public forum, admit climate change is caused by human behavior.
Absolutely. Absolutely crazy, as you say. Let's talk midterms, Congresswoman. You're from Pennsylvania. The Cook Political Report now says that the Pennsylvania Senate race between John Fetterman and Mehmet Oz is a toss-up. Just a few weeks ago, that was a race that was leaning Democratic in their view. Fetterman had a clear lead in the polls. What went wrong in Pennsylvania for your party?
I don't know that anything has gone wrong. The election has not yet taken place. I've been on the road with John Fetterman. Man, he is widely regarded, at least here in the southeastern part of the state when I have been with him. But I have seen and read the tightening. This connects very much to what we were just talking about. Dr. Oz is very much Trump. He's a snake oil salesman and made money selling snake oil and diet supplements. He's not from Pennsylvania. He's a fraud. We all know that. And so I think people are beginning to pay attention to these elections.
And yet it's neck and neck. And yet it's neck and neck.
I think that will widen and to the favor of John Fetterman winning. And here's a couple of reasons why. Number one, the issue of choice. Dr. Oz is so-called pro-life, which is actually not pro-life. It's just pro-control of women's bodies. So women, I have to tell you, I've been out campaigning, of course, for my own reelection. Women and girls and men as well are really stirred up. They recognize the stealing of rights of women and girls, putting us in a second-class citizen status. And we have somebody like Dr. Oz, allegedly a medical doctor, who's willing to partake in that kind of corruption. People are waking up.
Just to jump in, sorry for jumping in, we're almost out of time, and you mentioned the abortion issue, so I do want to ask one quick last separate question on that. You've heard, I'm sure, that anti-abortion GOP Senate candidate in Georgia, Herschel Walker, has been accused of paying for a former partner's abortion, according to reporting from the Daily Beast. Walker denies the allegations. What is your reaction to that story?
It's grotesque. Sadly, this party, the former Republican Party, I don't know who they are now, has embraced really damaged candidates who don't care about values. So take a look at Oz. Take a look at Mastriano. Let's pull in my gubernatorial race. Thank God we have Josh Shapiro running very strong. You see his numbers are getting stronger and stronger because people see who Mastriano is. He, too, is a Trump acolyte. He, too, is somebody who sold tickets to the insurrection, broke through the police barricades. So the Herschel Walker, it's a despicable candidacy, and the contrast to Reverend Warnock could not be greater. That's all three of these elections have that in common. The contrasts are so stark.
Yes,
I have faith in the American people to make sure they pick the public servant, not the guy who's just seeking power, fame, and money.
On that note, we will have to leave it there. Congresswoman Madeleine Dean, thank you so much for your time.